So where does neoliberalism come from? As a word, neoliberalism is not something that anybody sat down and said, okay, here is a great idea that we should do. We should start doing neoliberalism. That's not how it came to be. The word came about to describe all of the stuff that we see around us today. So the policies, the actions came first, and neoliberalism came later to describe what was going on. So neoliberal economics were born out of something known as the Friedman doctrine, which we'll talk about in another video. And neoliberal ideas only started to take hold in the 1980s under Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher in the United States and in the UK. That's where our story begins. There was no word for it back then. It was a set of random, seemingly disconnected ideas. An example of one neoliberal idea is trickle-down economics. Let's cut the cut the highest tax rates for the highest tax bracket, and by giving the wealthiest people in our country more money, they will invest it back into the economy, and everybody will benefit. Everybody will get to get some of the money raining down from up top. That's trickle-down economics. I cannot believe that this was successfully sold to an entire country for so long, but yeah, here we are. So however it was done, it worked. Reagan was sat there with his easel pointing at a chart explaining trickle-down economics to the country, and they bought it hook, line, and sinker. Why wouldn't they, though? Their president was telling them it was a good idea to do that. So I don't fault the people that were essentially just living their lives during all of this. But neoliberal economics, it's a doozy. It's a doozy. So we're going to take a look at where it comes from. The word, the important thing to remember, the word came after the ideas to describe the ideas. Similar to capitalism, Adam Smith never used the word capitalism in his work, The Wealth of Nations. He talks about markets. The word capitalism only came about from our friend Karl Marx, who was criticizing it, and he gave it the name capitalism. In the very same way, neoliberalism was a word that was created to criticize what was happening. A lot of people are studying this now. We'll take a look at some of these scholars, but the interesting fact here is that both with capitalism and with neoliberalism, which is kind of our current form of capitalism, but a little bit more than that, the word comes after the ideas. So that's important to know, because there aren't people sitting down necessarily conniving for the world to be a certain way and then puppeteering all the strings themselves. It's not that perfect. There are people in positions of power that are acting in self-interest and are able to do enough things that they add up together to this concept that we now call neoliberalism, but it wasn't a ploy that people sat down and drew out from the very beginning, and then now here we are. Nobody's that talented. Nobody can see the future to that extent. So that's just not how it works. That's the dose of realism that we need about neoliberalism, because it's not just some conspiracy, Illuminati, deep state situation that we're working with here. It is a real set of ideas that's not that old. 1980 was 40 years ago. We can change it. 40 years is just one lifetime. We can easily change those ideas. Just as easily as they came along, we can bring along new ideas. But don't be fooled, because they didn't just pop up one day with the snap of a finger. Milton Friedman was spewing his bullshit for years before Reagan listened to him and started to implement these ideas. Fortunately, we've had a lot of good economists talking about new ideas that can replace the damaging Friedman doctrine that prioritizes profits above all else. And those ideas have been incubating now for about 10, 15, almost 20 years, which is exactly how long these good economic ideas need to incubate before they're ready for the prime time. So that's where we are right now. It's time for a new era, my friends. Because Friedman and co. can stay in the past. We don't need you no more. Let's take a closer look at some of Friedman's ideas.